Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Roggins. I'm the CTO at YDC. I'm thrilled to join you at this year's MIT CDOIQ Symposium. Sunil, Soares, and I would like to welcome you to our sessions on data economics. I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I would like to welcome both our in-person and virtual audience to track 4, translating data into actionable insights. I am Lakshmi Randall, I'm a co-track producer and moderator for this session. So this session is focused on data economic signals, benchmarking. Google and Facebook monetize their data left and right. Why can't companies like you monetize the data without actually selling the data? Right? So this session will provide insights on how you can measure the value of data and why chief data officers and data leaders like you should collaborate with CFOs, chief financial officers, to leverage data valuation methodologies and frameworks to actually create data monetization index and understand the value of your data. Before I introduce the speaker, a few housekeeping details. This session is being recorded and it will be made available as part of your registration at no additional cost. For our virtual audience, please submit your questions via Hua app Q&A tab. For live audience, please raise your question. I will bring the microphone to you. Our speaker for this session is Sunil Soares. Sunil is the CEO of Your Data Connect. Sunil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Good evening, everybody.
Can you summarize the response?
Yes, go ahead. So Sanjeev is going to go ahead.
I'm just giving an insight into what the polls so far came up with. I think Lakshmi kind of talked about the benchmarking of it. So we had actually put a poll out there to just gauge about what kind of.
Yeah, he's going to.
Let me get a microphone.
He's going to get the
you.
microphone.
1 second. And introduce yourself.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah.
And please introduce yourself for the virtual audience.
Hey everyone, my name is Sanjeev Verma. I work with Sunil. I run the information asset organization, which is a solutions and the services arm for Your Data Connect. So before the session is starting off, I just wanted to give a quick insight into when we polled the audience about a couple of ideas, a couple of questions around that. One was around, is your organization doing benchmarking with your industries and your peer organizations? Very interestingly, 80% said no. So that's as of now. And then the other question that we asked was, what is the kind of benchmarking that you typically would go to? And interesting one was that probably the highest response was around data valuation. So I think that is probably resonating with the theme that we are looking to present here as well. So Sunil, I think that's probably a lead into what the audience is looking for to get some additional details.
Thank you, everybody. Sunil Soares. I'm going to spend some time, next 26 minutes, and talk to you about data economics, signals, benchmarking. For those of you who are in my earlier session, there's probably a 5-minute overlap because I wasn't sure who was going to be where. But then we've got 2 case studies, right, around data economics, benchmarking that weren't covered in the earlier session. So your time is well spent. So first off, we've heard data monetization. Well, it's not what I like, but many organizations we talk to don't like the concept of monetization because it implies selling data. So we basically use the tagline data economics. So what are we trying to do here, right? We've got a series of data economic signals. I want to give you some examples, and I'm going to go through 2 case studies. So how do you benchmark sort of your data organization cross-industry? We've got a concept of a data monetization index across companies. How do you value your data? We take a data product approach, so a lot of discussion about data products and the data mesh. But what does that really mean in practice, right? So we say, okay, how do you value data at the company level, at the division level, at the data product level? How do you benchmark your data management spend versus the competition? It's one thing to say how valuable is your data, but how much money are you spending, right? That's important. Are there opportunities for alpha? So when you start thinking through, how can you increase the market cap of your company? What can you do if you're in a non-profit organization or you're not publicly traded? There's some other metric. If you're in a government organization, can you do more with the same budget, for example? How do you start? And then we're also thinking about this whole concept of intangibles, including customer lifetime value. So if you go to our website, yourdataconnect.com, I did cover this in the earlier session, but I'll go through it at a high level. What we've tried to do here is to say, most chief data officers struggle with what's the value of the data. The average tenure of a CDO is 2.4 years. There's various topics reasons about why that is, but our hypothesis a lot has to do with, are you able to sell the value of the data internally and externally within your organization? So if you go to our website, yourdataconnect.com, we have this concept of a data monetization index. What's the value of your company's data divided by the value of the company? And then we've got a benchmark across sectors. These are the S&P, Standard & Poor's, GICS sector codes. So you see real estate's a little bit lower. You would expect it. It's a highly tangible business. The value is intangibles. Communication services is much higher. It's almost half. This is where you got Facebook's, Google's, Disney's in there, Netflix. Consumer discretionary is where you would have folks like Nike. Consumer staples would be a lot of the retailers. Financials is higher. Utilities is somewhat lower. Okay? So at a very high level, it gives you a sense for what that is across sector. And then what we've got here is, I picked one example. I picked consumer packaged goods, right? And we said, okay, these are examples of publicly traded companies. And in this case, I took Coca-Cola. And we said, what's the value of Coca-Cola's data? $83 billion. Now, the value of Coca-Cola's data is only as good as what external data we have and the data products that are available. If they are figuring out some internal data product around how to grow their customer base, we wouldn't know about it. So it will not show up in this value. So we're saying the value of Coca-Cola's data is worth $83 billion. Enterprise value of Coca-Cola, which is equity plus long-term debt minus cash, is 289. So that's 29% approximately. And you can see here the benchmark. Here's the data monetization index. Here's Coca-Cola, relative to its peers in the CPG, right? And on average, if you go to our website, the average for CPG is about 12% versus the rest of the, versus other companies. And then right here, what you can do is you can also get down into, not only am I valuing data at the enterprise level, I've got an example for Merck here. So you can start thinking too, if you're a CDO at the enterprise level, you can start thinking about how do I value data for each division. And then you can build a hierarchy, much like you built a PIM hierarchy, product information management. You can build a data products hierarchy, starting with enterprise value, divisional value, maybe by geography, and they'll go down to individual products. Right, and then this is how we've basically decomposed the value of the data products down at the data product level. So you see the value of Coca-Cola's data is $83 billion. The value of their loyalty program is $53 billion. And it's based on how many loyalty members are publicly disclosed, not always good information available. What's the customer lifetime value of Coca-Cola? And then we've just taken 20%. Not all the value of Coca-Cola's customer lifetime value is around data. The industry experts say you can take 20 to 40%, so we took 20%. So that's the value of their loyalty data. And then what's the value of supply chain data, right? We assigned a value to that. So if you look at consumer packaged goods companies, restaurant chains, there's a lot of value in what is called first-party data. First-party data is, I actually have data about the customer. Many times with consumer packaged goods, you don't know who your end customer is. So you set up a loyalty app so you can get that first-party data. There's value associated with that. And then from a consumer packaged goods perspective, what we also said is what's the mirror image? What's the percent of what am I doing relative to data management and overall employees? So we don't know what the data management spend is, right? But what we do know is we can go to LinkedIn, for example, and say how many folks have data management or analytics in their title, and what's the total number of employees? You can see Clorox is pretty high, Coca-Cola slightly lower, Procter & Gamble is in the ballpark. So it starts to give you a benchmark, okay? So these are some overall benchmarks. Now what I'm going to try to do in the next 20 minutes is I'll spend time and go through 2 case studies, and I didn't cover those in the earlier session. So this is new content. So I'm going through a banking example. And in this case, we'll talk about data products. But much like you think about data products, much of you think about products, your PIM, your product information management, you think of multiple hierarchies. I'll encourage you to think about the same thing here from a banking perspective. So in this case, in our comparables analysis, I've got a regional bank, I've got credit union B, credit union A. So I've got two credit unions and I've got a regional bank. So now what I've done here is, and I will go to this case study, regional bank, the first regional bank, they've got their aggregate customer lifetime value. So the average value per customer, and I'll show you how we came up with this. Excuse me, it's a lot of numbers, right? But average CLV for a customer times the number of customers, $1.2 billion. So really the aggregate value of their intangible assets is 1.2 billion, right? It's only one data product at a high level. Their market cap is 1.6 billion. So the intangible asset index is 74%, and I've called it current. That's a current hierarchy, which is this value should be reflected in the stock market value to the extent they're publicly traded. The first one is publicly traded, the other two are not, okay? The second one is Credit Union B. It's not publicly traded, it's owned by its members, it's mutual. The aggregate value of their customers is $55 billion. And the market cap is 16 billion. Now it's net worth, they're not publicly traded. So you look at the book value. Typically financial institutions are traded on as a multiple of book. So the intangible asset index is 331%. So when the team came to me with that number, I was a little confounded. Either something's wrong with the numbers, but you'll see later on why it's accurate. And now what does that mean in reality, right? 331%. And then Credit Union A, the customer lifetime value in aggregate is 2.2 billion, and the market capitalization is about 1.7, so it's 128%. So in the first case, it's publicly traded, 74%. The other two cases, they're mutual, right? So I'm showing you net worth, not market cap, but it's 331%, 128%. So right off the bat, I'm seeing something very interesting. So that's a tops-down approach. So you would say, if I talk to my folks in private equity, customer lifetime value is the net present value of all the cash flows I'm expecting from my customers. So really, they should be reflected in the value of the company. Now I'm going to take a bottoms-up approach. So any of you who worked in banking, financial services, 90% of the time of any CDO organization is spent in regulatory compliance in many instances, right? I mean, that tends to be where there's a lot of pressure depending on your organization. So that's a bottoms-up approach, and I'll tell you why we did that. So typically, what we did was we looked at these three organizations, and capital adequacy is a big deal, right? So what is capital adequacy for those of you not in banking? It's, does the bank have enough, the feds in the US, the Federal Reserve, or the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, or the relevant authority internationally, requires the banks to maintain a certain amount of capital so they can make loans, right? You have to justify that you don't have bad loans, you have enough equity, right? So what's the value associated with regulatory compliance? How do you figure that out? So what you've seen historically for the large banks is if you do not comply with these capital adequacy guidelines, the Fed will not let you buy back stock, they won't let you pay dividends, and they won't let you buy another company. So how do you understand what's the value associated with that? So we went back in time. Just after COVID, the Fed told all the banks they could not buy back stock, period, because the Fed was worried that there were going to be a lot of unemployment, therefore a lot of bad loans, which did not happen because of all the stimulus. So in December of 2020, the Fed told the big banks, you can go ahead and buy back stock. So overnight, the value of JP Morgan Chase and some of the big banks went up 5%. So you look at comparables like that and you say on average, we think that the value of regulatory compliance is around 2% of your market cap. You can look at empirical evidence and say it's about 2%. So then the value of my capital adequacy data product, which means, what am I doing? I'm doing data products around data governance, I'm doing report certification, I'm doing data quality, all that is about 2%. So it's worth $29 billion, 300 million, whatever the number is. So this is a tops-down approach. So this is a second hierarchy that says from a bottoms up, I still have all these unidentified data products. They could be internal data products that the data organization is manufacturing. So I'm ending up with the same numbers. So this is more of a tops-down approach, which is to say, what's the value of my customers? This is a bottoms-up approach. You probably have other data products that we don't have here. And then the third approach is to say, well, I'm running a series of analysis. I'm building new data products. I'm building analytical data products, reports. So in this particular case, I've got a very small, this is all sanitized to protect the innocent. So I've got a very small number, which is I'm running an analysis around trust accounts. I want to figure out which customers don't have a trust account, but they're wealthy enough. I'm going to recommend a trust account. So the value of that action is not reflected in any of the cash flow. So that would be what we call a potential data product. So I've got 3 different hierarchies. I could have multiple hierarchies. I've got tops down for my current data products, bottoms up, and then I've got bottoms up for a potential as well. Okay. So now the next thing that we did is to say, okay, why is that these companies, these earlier 2 companies, why do they have such high intangible asset index? The value of the intangible assets, which is customers, is so high. So let's look at some of the benchmarking here. So we see for regional bank 1, right, and regional bank 2, they're US. The third one is Canadian. But what's interesting is that regional bank 1, their customers, sit around for about 10 years. They have a 5% churn rate. This credit union has 11% churn rate, but this one is very interesting. They had a high intangible asset index. I won't tell you who it is, but they target a very narrow customer base. It's an affinity group. Their customers don't churn, and they stay with them on average for 20 years. So you can imagine, right, if you're just looking at the cash flows per year and applying a multiple, you get a stock price. But when you actually see 2 companies, one company's customers are extremely loyal. They're there for a long time. They leave when they die, unfortunately, right? Or there's some other life event, but the others churn maybe every 10 years or so. Then you understand which one has a more valuable customer base. But now how do we get that reflected in the value of the company? So we've decomposed the overall value of the company down to something very tangible. Now you can have another set of data products around churn, right? So you think of a hierarchy of data products, and now you can start thinking about doing churn analytics and churn prediction. Right, that's another data product, okay? So now I'm going to go into a little more detail. So I'm going to get into a little more math. Clearly from a data economics perspective, the Chief Data Officer organization needs to build that financial muscle. So I'll try not to go into too much detail here, but you'll see for this particular credit union, the customer lifetime value for the existing members is around $6,000. They have 375,000 members. So their aggregate customer lifetime value is about 2.2 billion net worth, right? And then you can see the benchmark, right? They've got 128% versus 331. Why does this matter? Once you start taking that customer lifetime value, you can apply it not just at the aggregate level. $6,000 is an average number, but there's probably customers whose CLV is 25,000, 30,000, 100,000. And there's others who might be worth $100. They don't have a big deposit account. They're not taking loans. Frankly, they're unprofitable. So now this could be the basis for segmentation, right, using CLV. You can use demographics and things like that, but this can help you from a CLV perspective. So then this is how we calculate. We went further, right? So you can see what we did was we computed the monthly lifetime value. We got the valuation, 2.2 billion. And then we went through a complete analysis around how many members do they have, right here. And then think about how does a bank make money? What does a bank do? A bank takes deposits from their customers, and a bank makes loans to customers. Now, how do you think about a customer who, typically this particular bank, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if I have the numbers here, but you take deposits at a very low interest rate, probably 0.13%. It'll probably go up a little bit as interest rates go up. So a bank would take deposits at 13 basis points on average. There might be checking accounts where they don't pay interest. Savings account, they pay a little more. Certificates of deposits, even more. So 13 basis points. But then they'll make loans, and this is 2021 data. So this is before interest rates went up. But they are making loans at probably 4.5% on average. So now you've got to start thinking through what happens if a customer's got $1 million with the bank, but they don't take a loan. Or a customer has $1 million loan, but they don't have deposits with the bank. So you think of a transfer pricing mechanism. So think of it as if I'm making a deposit at 13 basis points, what's the transfer pricing? to the loan department. So that's what we've done here. We've said on average, a customer has a credit margin. She said, what's the average loan balance? What's the credit margin? What's the average deposit balance? And then you see what's really interesting, which is where most of the banks make money. They're making money from fees. And fee income is beautiful because you don't need to set aside any capital. You don't need to set aside regulatory capital, so it's hugely profitable. You don't take a lot of risk, obviously. Now, cost to serve is critical. So what's the cost associated with serving that customer? So you've got people in the call center, you've got branch personnel, so that's the cost on average. So this is your operating income. In this, the numbers aren't called out, but you would want to deduct collections expense. You're collecting money from people who don't pay, from delinquencies, loan loss, charge-offs, those are all included. Then I've got my operating income. I've got a churn rate, 11%, and I've got an average tenure of 10 years. So, and then I basically run a discounted cash flow, and I've got a customer lifetime value of $6,000. I multiply it by the number of members, and I get 2.2 billion. So now you can see how you can build this model, and then you can tweak the model. You can understand, how the bank makes money, where you can target what you do. Okay. This is the methodology. In the interest of time, won't spend too much on it, but it goes through exactly how each of the drivers work. Each of these line items can be another data product. So everything we're doing is essentially a data product to drive to an overall number, which is that intangible asset index, right? I'm not going to go into this. This is just a more detail. Now, this is interesting. This is, and you have these slides, obviously. This is data management spend. I put real companies here because this is all real data. It's on our website as well. So it's real companies, and you can see on average, data management divided by total employees. So how many employees do they have? How many data management employees do you have? I think it's about 2.19%. So 2.19% of employees, total employees, are data management employees, okay? Obviously, some banks might be using more vendors, which won't show up. They might be having more offshore, which will have we can't account for that. But you see some interesting anomalies. You see Discover financials almost over 5%. I don't think it's a bad thing, right? But it's good to know. Capital One, 6.5%. American Express is high. Ally Financial is high. So they're investing. So it's good to understand, how folks are doing. And there's other companies that don't appear to be investing as much in data management, at least from these numbers. Okay. So now I'm going to take another. We've got 7 minutes. So I'm going to take another use case from life sciences. Was there another poll, or we went through the polls? We went through the polls. Okay. So life sciences. So life sciences is pharmaceuticals, medical devices. And I'll take a use case less focused on numbers. But in this case, what I thought we'd do is everyone talks about data products, but no one knows what a data product is, right? I see a thumbs up there. No one knows what a data product is, but everyone wants it. Everyone wants it because it's really cool. So you saw in the earlier one, we talked about data products. So really what you got to do now is you start valuing all these data products. That you would do, right? Now in life sciences, those of you who work there, what I've got I'm going to say ontology. It's a very, I did data governance in the past. So I've got a domain. I've got pharmaceuticals, med devices, animal health. This is like a multi-line pharma company, right? Animal health, commercial. Commercial is sales organization, shared services. And then we've got a second level domain. I've got neuroscience, oncology, regulatory compliance. Then I've got clinical data sets under neuro, clinical trials. All the way down, if you see clinical data sets, I go into medical devices, all the way down to Global Unique Device Identification Database, QDID, right? So that's what's used, I believe, in Europe. And then I've got another example here, which is supply chain. I've got, I could have a data product around how I'm managing days on hand, right? And I maybe have some predictive models to reduce product manufacturing costs due to improvement in quality of days on hand. So I might have a data product here that fits into my overall hierarchy, okay? And once again, we've got to understand, very, very important, companies manufacture a lot of data products in Snowflake. So bad idea to go bottoms up and start adding up each data product, because you'll end up with infinity, because a lot of the data product value overlaps. So it's important to think about it from that context. These are external data sets. So not only do you have internal data sets, you have external data sets. One of our clients is spending $600 million buying data from third parties, and the vendors are great. They'll sell this one data set to one organization, change two fields, sell the same data set to another organization, right? So starting to think through and having a catalog of these data products they're buying. And you can see right here, we've got the domains, the clinical data. It's all real world data. It's electronic medical records, longitudinal description, claims, hospitals, what's the frequency, who's selling it. And then this is an example where you go even further. So this particular organization is a medical device manufacturer. They're spending $50 million in compliance with the European Union medical device regulation, right? So basically having good product data so that you can facilitate recalls. You put a stent in someone getting recalls. I'll finish in 2 minutes, right? And then now what we've got is I've got medical device, the medical device critical data elements. And you see right here, I've got a bunch of critical data elements, UDI number, manufacturer name, address, and then data quality rules. So now I'm linking back to something that we understand from a data governance perspective. And then finally, I just wanted to leave you with, from a benchmarking perspective, how you could start thinking about valuing these data products using comparables. So in this case, how do I value basic employee data? Well, look at LinkedIn. They get all their value from basically basic employee data. So Microsoft spent $26 billion 6 years ago to buy LinkedIn, half a billion records. So value per employee record is about $60. So if you're working with HR, that's a good benchmark. And then this one is genomic data, also known as DNA data. So this is when 23andMe got an investment of $300 million from GSK for exclusive access to their database for oncology research. 5 million records, $60 per record, implied value. So that's it. I think we have 3 minutes for questions.
Thank you for sharing. I represent Coca-Cola company, so one comment. I'd love to, one comment and a question. The comment is I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you did the math over there. So that's one thing.
Your loyalty data was, we searched high and low.
Maybe.
And your loyalty data was a little bit dated. So I think the number's actually higher than that.
Let's connect and learn more. The question, I'm curious what kind of actions you saw being taken as a result of this, of the index being developed and socialized within companies.
So we couple of things. So we just finished work with a real estate company. So one of the things was they want to value additional data products, and they want to be able to understand what the value is. So every time someone comes to them and says, there's an intake process and says, I want you to create a new data product. First question is this, how much is the value? So let's go through an analysis to say, what's the value? But don't have an infinite value, right? Where all these data, so some mechanism for that. That's the first thing. The second one was they wanted to benchmark how much they were spending versus the competition. And the answer is that it was no different. So he couldn't ask for more money. A third one, I spoke about this in the earlier session, we were looking, what's interesting is there data that's no one's valuing. So one of the, home companies, let's say, I don't want to mention the name, they were being looked at by private equity. And the question is, are they more valuable to another company by helping them get into the metaverse? So when you start thinking about if we help this other company get into the metaverse, the value of that data might be worth about $100 per user in the metaverse, because the value of the metaverse data is extremely intrusive, right? But it's also extremely valuable on the other hand. So you assign a value to that. So that could potentially unlock some value from a third-party perspective. Relative to that banking example, this credit union that had a 128%, they're not calculating, they have Databricks, but they're not calculating customer lifetime value at all. So that's a whole other discussion they need to go through. The customer lifetime value for the real estate organization, they were not doing. So there was a whole process to score customer lifetime value using Azure Synapse, and then make decisions around next best action at the resident level.
Any other questions? There is a question from virtual audience. Are
Yes.
companies using these economic models to make decisions on acquisitions and mergers?
Yes. So I mentioned this private equity firm. They called me.
Yeah.
They were very rigorous about how did you get these numbers, et cetera. And then they put the phone down, right? But the next week they made an announcement saying management's not doing a good job. The best way to unlock value is X. So we're also working with private equity, and there's a whole part of their work which is around data diligence. Because data is an intangible asset. In general, you'll see academic research that says 80 to 90% of the value of the S&P 500 is intangibles. I mean, what's the value? Most companies don't have a lot of plant and equipment. It's all brand, customer lists.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would be interested in the data management spend because that's actually something a lot of companies at the moment are looking into. So what is your the logic behind defining it? Is it also LinkedIn data?
That is very simple, right? We basically just did a poll. We scanned. We did 2 metrics. We can't tell you. We can't figure out. So we took what's the total number of employees. That's publicly disclosed information. We pulled that into our lake. And data management spend, we took a certain number of job titles from LinkedIn, right? And it's actually amazingly accurate, or it's directional. And we said data analytics is 3 or 4 titles. And then we did an analysis. Now what it doesn't tell you is one company having more offshore labor? Is one company potentially having more vendors? We're not able to, that we can't discern. We haven't done an analysis that we want to do to say if a company has a CDO, do they have a higher, actually a higher data management index, higher market cap? Okay?
Okay.
So 2.something% is the benchmark.
2. Yeah, exactly. So for banks, that was banks. 2.1%. For CPG, I think it was 1.8%, but it's 1.8% of total employees. So if you think of retail, the number is extremely low. If you're looking at Walmart, they're not going to have a lot of data management compared to everyone in the warehouse, right?
Okay. Thank you everyone for attending. Applause to Sunil. Thank you.